Let me introduce myself. I used to work at Google, then ran FutureCam, a camera app. Then I worked as CTO of a different startup. I now work as a consulting CTO. Today we are going to talk about how to use Firebase Analytics effectively. I'm not recommending Firebase Analytics and I won't use it in my next project myself, at least not without first evaluating other options. But if you are going to use it anyway, or if you have already adopted it, this video will give you some tips on how to use it effectively. Firebase Analytics automatically collects a lot of data. If you integrate it and don't write any custom code, you get a lot. Let's look at that. First, you track, let's say, reset this to, let's say, this calendar year. First, you get monthly active users and daily active users and weekly active users. And you can see the trends over time. So the app peaked in March, and after that it's going down, which makes sense since it's an abandoned app. And the ratio of daily to monthly active users is called the stickiness. And for FutureCam, it is 7%, and 20% is considered good. You can see the users in last 30 minutes. Someone is using it in Jordan right now. I don't think there's much data. And some of this, oh, you can get a user snapshot. Let's see if this works. Some of these are hidden unless there are enough data points to preserve users' privacy. So anyway, there isn't much. But if the user were to take a photo and so on, you can follow live here. I think real time is what we just saw. You can find out which app versions are doing well over different time periods. So for example, 1.19 is already the latest version that was out. If you change this time period, you'll see a graph of one version go down and another version go up. So let's go to, let's say, June 1st, 2019. To this time period. We'll see if we can get anything here. Here you can see for each version how many users it had and so on. How many of them were new, how many of them continued or upgraded from a previous version, and so on. Let's go back here. What percentage of users are crash free? And it's all of them. How long is each user using the app? 5 minutes. I don't know what this is. How many? Oh, this. How many sessions each user has? If you open the app and then use it for at least 10 seconds, then a session starts. And if you go to another app, after some threshold, the session comes to an end. And then if you come back, it is considered a new session. Whereas if you switch to another back and come to another app and come back in 3 seconds, it's considered the same session. So this shows that people are using the app only twice, which is not good at all. This is user retention. This is cohorts. This is important for retention because, so the way cohorts work is you break up the calendar into different time periods. Each of this is called a cohort. And week 0 for each cohort is that time period. So week 0 for this is 21st to 27th. And then you track things that way. And if your earlier cohorts are doing well, then it means your app is doing well. Whereas the numbers can keep going up because you're acquiring new users. Or after a while, people are seeing that this app is no longer valuable and leaving. You don't want to average it all together and say the app is doing well, right? In fact, this was part of the reason that Slack had a successful IPO. They said, look, our older cohorts, they are still growing and growing and growing in revenue for years. So there's a big business here, which means today's users will continue growing for 5 more years. So that's a kind of sophisticated analysis you can make. This tells you which screen is being used more within your app. You can calculate it based on users or views. So if a single user uses something multiple times, it's counted. So you can use this to find out which features are used more. These are all onboarding stuffs. Liquid shutter controller. This is one of our features. This is our most common feature here. So anyway, you can define key events to track called conversions. You can track events. Again, you can track by count or users. So for example, long exposure is again our most heavily used feature. And only 437 or 466 out of 1000, which is like half, used any feature. Right? This is called activation, which means the user got something that they came to the app for. Why do you use a messaging app? To send a message. So if you do that, then you're considered activated. What is activation in e-commerce? It is placing an order. It is not creating a profile. It's not searching for products, comparing them, reading reviews, adding to the cart. Those are all means to an end. And the end is placing an order. That's activation. Then you have achieved something. If you are not activated, you won't come back to the app because you are not getting anything out of it. Activation is good for the company as well because if you are activated, then they can get money from you. Otherwise, they can't. Even if they ask you, you won't pay. Let's see what else we have. Yes, total revenue is very low, especially after I abandoned the app. ARPU, average purchase revenue per user, is not even 1 rupee. You can find out users per country to find out in which countries your app is doing well. You can see India, US, Iraq, etc., UAE. Which models are popular? For some reason, something called iPhone shows up. There's no iPhone. But if you ignore that, you'll find out that the older models are the most popular. Right? The iPhone XS doesn't even show up, let alone the iPhone 11 Pro, let alone the 12, let alone the 13. Maybe also because this app did not acquire a lot of users in the last year, I guess. So whoever's using it from earlier is using, like you can interpret this in different ways, right? Once you have the data. So all of this, most of this, you can get just by integrating the Firebase SDK. You don't need to write any code. But if you're willing to write code, you can go further, right? You can get information that is specific to your app. Events like long exposure taken or photo taken, which are specific to your app. Even if you don't do that, it's very useful to integrate an analytics package. You should. But let's see how we can get more out of it. So in FutureCam's case, the events are the taken properly. So media taken, long exposure taken, light trail taken, burst, time lapse. These are all the features we have, right? And you will find that the most popular feature has 400 users, and the least popular one, time lapse, has 10 users. So often an app has a lot of features, but a few are extremely heavily used and a few are hardly used. So you can see that pattern here. You can see that on average, each user is taking 3-4 long exposures, 2 light trails, 1 burst, and 2 time lapses. And the way you log it in the code is in this analytics, you log an event saying light trail taken properly. So Firebase has a analytics class, and this is iOS code, but the same concept applies to web and Android and other platforms. In that analytics class, you call analytics.log event name and parameters. Here's an example of parameters. When an error happens in the code detects it and logs this. So if you go to verification failure here, only 10 users have had a problem out of 1,000. So it's very good. The code quality is excellent. And we have put in custom messages, which we can correlate back to the code. So you can see where in the code things are going wrong. You can see which file as well. This is photo bracket settings. You can see this file is having trouble, presumably this assertion. And in fact, use video comes high. And when you notice this trend, firstly, all of them have low user count. So none of them is really a problem. The reason I'm looking at users is if 99% of your users are having a great experience, it's a good thing. Maybe the remaining 1%, the app always crashes or misbehaves. That's okay. But if the same errors were distributed uniformly, perhaps you would find a greater number of people abandoning the app. So yeah, you'll have to figure out how you want to interpret this. Maybe what I said isn't true, but this is just data that you can interpret however you want. But so these numbers are not a problem, but the event numbers, if you look at this, if you solve these two, you've made an order of magnitude improvement in the code quality. So that is how you should think about it. A little goes a long way. Fixing this bug is not worth it. As engineers, we want to get everything perfect, but apps always crash on iOS in the background. Swiggy does, Gmail does, Slack does, they all do. So each of the custom parameters, you get a statistics like this: verification message, file, function. This initializer is going wrong, line number. Because it's a number, it creates a graph. If it were a string, you'd get this kind of thing. It's not useful, but the most common data point is 288. So line 288 of some file, things are going wrong, etc. Now, if you change this to 3 months, what are the event count? 0. So this shows that we have fixed all our bugs. or at least they're not happening anymore, even if you haven't fixed them. The name can also be dynamically generated, the name of the event. So FutureCam has different types of hints that guide you on how to use the app better. There's a tripod hint shown, which tells you to use a tripod. There's a light trail night hint shown, which tells you that light trail mode is meant to be used at night. And this happens if you take a light trail in daytime. And the name is dynamically generated this way. So that's something you can do. A prompt sometimes happens as you use the app, saying, would you like to give feedback? And if the user agrees, we misuse Firebase Analytics to capture the email ID. And at our scale, it works well. If you're Microsoft, this technique doesn't work, but otherwise it does. So anyway, this was a walkthrough of how we used Firebase Analytics in FutureCam. If you want to use Firebase Analytics, I hope this was useful. If you want me to help your team with any engineering topic, there's a link in the description.